Forced to switch schools because of her family's circumstances, 16-year-old Zara Williams finds herself walking unfamiliar halls at Lincoln High. A quiet, determined black girl with a mind wired for numbers, Zara isn't just another new face. She's a hidden math prodigy. But no one sees that. Not yet. The halls of Lincoln High smelled like old books and bleach, a stark contrast to the polished, sunlit corridors of her former school. This place felt older, heavier, the kind of school where you had to fight to be seen. She hadn't wanted to leave. Her old school was the one place she'd finally started to belong. But when her mom landed a new job across town, they had to move. And Lincoln was closer. "It's more diverse," her mom had said, like that somehow made it easier. It didn't. From the moment she stepped into her first class, she could feel it. The stares, the whispered comments, the cliques already sealed tight. Teachers skimmed over her name during roll call. Desks were claimed before she could pick one. Then came math class. She sat in the back, hoping to disappear into the numbers. But the teacher had other plans. He called her name, then pointed to the board. "Zara, why don't you give this one a try?" The equation he wrote was far above grade level. A test, maybe, or a message. Some students snickered. Others didn't bother to look. Everyone seemed to wait for her to fail. But what they didn't know, what no one at Lincoln High knew, was that Zara Williams didn't just like math. She lived it. At lunch, Zara sat alone. No one invited her to join their table. No one even looked her way. She was used to being overlooked. But this felt different. At Lincoln High, it wasn't just about being invisible. It was about being an outsider. When the final bell rang, the halls erupted with noise, laughter, slamming lockers, plans shouted over shoulders. But for Zara, the day was far from over. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, eyes down, backpack tight against her shoulder. Blending in wasn't just a habit. It was survival. If teachers didn't notice her, they didn't expect anything. If students didn't notice her, they didn't ask questions she didn't want to answer. Outside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass and diesel fumes from the buses pulling away. Most kids went home to scroll through their phones, watch TV, or complain about homework. Zara didn't have that kind of freedom. Her shift at Gus's diner started in 20 minutes. The walk there was familiar, past broken sidewalks, rusted fences, and shuttered shops with faded signs. The neighborhood wore its years openly, like the people who lived there. Zara pushed through the diner's glass door, the bell above it giving a tired jingle. She tied on her apron without a word. The scent of grease, dish soap, and stale coffee filled the air. Plates clattered. Conversations murmured beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. Mrs. Patel, the owner, stood behind the counter counting receipts. She glanced up briefly, then went back to her papers. No greeting, no smile, just business as usual. And that was fine with Zara. She preferred places where no one asked too much. "You're late." 2 minutes. Zara mumbled an apology. "Still late," Mrs. Patel replied, but her voice lacked any real bite. It was more routine than reprimand. The shift passed in a blur of motion, clearing tables, refilling drinks, wiping ketchup smears from menus. Tired customers came and went, and Zara moved around them like clockwork, precise, invisible, steady. Her body worked. Her mind wandered. Back to the math problem from class. Back to the chalk on the board, and the feeling of everyone waiting for her to stumble. When the dinner rush died down, she finally got a moment to breathe. She ducked into the supply closet, where the smell of bleach and cardboard hung heavy in the air. Under the flickering bulb, She pulled out a worn spiral notebook, its pages soft at the edges, filled with pencil-scratched formulas and equations. This was her classroom. No tutors, no special programs, just scraps of time like this, stolen in between shifts and silence. After work, the streets were hushed, lit by the glow of street lamps and the occasional flicker of neon signs in dark shop windows. Most kids would be home by now. Zara kept walking. Lincoln High's library sat at the edge of campus, quiet and still. She slipped inside using the back door, the one the janitor always forgot to lock, and moved through the dim corridors like she belonged there. Because in a way, she did. Here, no one asked questions. No one demanded answers. The only voices were the ones printed in books. She headed straight to the math section, pulled out an advanced calculus text, and sat cross-legged in her favorite corner. Her fingers traced the equations as she solved them in her head. Numbers didn't laugh. Numbers didn't judge. They just made sense. Then, a voice, sharp and unexpected, broke the silence. "You're not supposed to be here." Zara froze. "Seriously?" Zara tensed, then looked up. Monica Wells stood just a few feet away, tall, polished, effortlessly confident, like someone who'd never worn hand-me-downs or borrowed textbooks. Two girls flanked her, wearing identical smirks. "Didn't know you were into this kind of stuff," Monica said, casually leaning against the bookshelf. "Pretty sure the easy math books are on the other side." One of her friends snorted. Zara's grip on the textbook tightened, but her voice stayed even. "I'm in the right section." Monica rolled her eyes. "What? You think you're some math genius now, just because Mr. Calloway let you play teacher for a minute?" The words hit harder than they should have. Zara had spent most of her life being overlooked, ignored, not mocked. This new kind of attention, sharp and loud, was unfamiliar. Monica smirked. "It's kind of funny, though. The girl who cleans tables at Gus's acting like she's solving NASA problems." Laughter echoed again, sharper this time. Zara inhaled slowly. For years, she had taught herself not to react, not to let them see the sting. But this time, it was different. She wasn't doing this for anyone's approval. She was doing it for the version of herself that deserved more, for the future Monica didn't believe she'd ever reach. Zara closed the book with a quiet snap and stood. She looked Monica in the eye, calm, unshaken. "Someday," she said softly, "you'll wish you paid more attention to the girl from Gus's." Then she walked past them, head high, heart steady, already solving her next equation in her mind. "Funny," Zara said calmly. "We'll see who's laughing when I leave this town. And you're still here." Monica's smirk wavered. Zara didn't wait for a comeback. She walked past them, silent and steady, their eyes trailing her as she checked out the book. She had work to do. Late night. By the time she got home, the anger had cooled into something sharper, something focused. She didn't bother turning on the lights. The glow from the street lamp outside her window was enough. She dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and opened her notebook. Equations flowed from her pencil like breath. If they thought she'd back down, if they thought they could make her feel small enough to disappear, they didn't know her at all. She worked late, the silence broken only by the soft scratch of graphite on paper. Math had always made more sense than people. The next morning, exhaustion clung to her like fog. Still, Zara walked into school with her head high, unaware that this would be the day everything changed. Dr. Nathan Ellis stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, a quiet observer. His eyes, sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses, tracked every student. Not just the loud ones, not just the confident ones. He'd spent the morning moving from class to class, watching, listening. And in this room, it wasn't the usual suspects that caught his attention. It was the girl in the second row, fighting to keep her eyes open, and solving problems in her notebook no one else had even noticed. Lincoln High was like every other underfunded school Dr. Nathan Ellis had visited. Walls that needed paint, hallways that echoed with potential and neglect. It was a place where brilliance often went unseen, where students survived more than they thrived. Ellis's mission wasn't just to find talent. It was to find the kind no one was looking for, the kind that slipped through the cracks. At the front of the room, Mr. Calloway spoke in a dull monotone, the voice of a teacher who'd long since decided which students were worth his time and which ones weren't. Ellis had seen enough classrooms to know how this worked. The same hands always got called on, the same names repeated. The rest? Background noise. His gaze moved across the room, passing over slouched shoulders, restless fingers, half-shut eyes, until it stopped. Near the back sat a girl with her head down, pencil tapping a rhythm into her notebook. She looked tired, too tired for a girl her age. But then, something changed. She glanced up, just for a second, and in that second, he saw it. Not just attention, but calculation. Her eyes darted to the board before anyone else's. She wasn't just listening. She was already solving. Interesting. Then Calloway's voice cut through the hum of low chatter. Zara. The girl stiffened. Ellis watched closely. Calloway turned, a hint of a smirk on his face. "Since you seem distracted," he said, gesturing toward the board, "why don't you come up and solve this one for us?" The problem on the board wasn't fair. It wasn't a quiz question. It was a trap. Ellis leaned forward slightly in his chair. "Let's see what happens now." It was a trap, and from the smug curve of Mr. Calloway's mouth it was clear. He wanted Zara to fail. Ellis didn't move, still leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. "Let's see what she does." Zara clenched her fists beneath the sleeves of her hoodie. Then, slowly, she stood. The classroom went still. A silence thick with doubt, expectation, amusement. She walked to the front, each step measured, like she refused to let them see the shake in her hands. She didn't need to look around. She could feel it, the whispers, the smirks. She's gonna mess it up. She'll blank. Why even bother? But she wasn't thinking about them. She was staring at the equation, a mess of fractions, variables, exponents stacked like a wall meant to intimidate. A wall she'd seen before. She picked up the chalk. Behind her, Calloway crossed his arms. "Take your time," he said, voice slick with mock kindness. "If it's too hard, you can always sit back down." The words landed like sparks, but instead of flinching, Zara inhaled, slow and deep, and tuned it all out. The voices, the pressure, even Calloway. This wasn't new. She had solved tougher problems in tighter places. Diner closets, bathroom stalls, under the buzz of flickering lights, scribbled on napkins and receipts. Her first line of chalk hit the board with a sharp click. Clean, confident. Then another. And another. She broke the problem into parts, simplifying, isolating, reshaping, like breathing, like instinct. The room, once buzzing, fell into stunned silence. Even Ellis sat up straighter now. She wasn't just solving it. She was teaching it a lesson. The class waited for her to hesitate, to mess up, to prove she didn't belong at the front of the room. But she didn't. The snickers died first. Then the whispers faded into nothing. Even Calloway's smirk began to twitch, uneasy now, not amused. Zara felt the shift, that precise moment when the room's doubt turned into something else. Curiosity, unease, respect, maybe. She finished the last step, underlining the final answer. Then, calmly, she set the chalk down and turned to face the class. Her gaze found Calloway. Steady, unflinching. "That should be correct," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Calloway blinked. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He turned to the board, scanning her work with narrowed eyes, desperate for a flaw. Anything to prove her wrong. But there was nothing. A murmur rippled across the room. Jason, a boy in the front row, leaned forward, eyes squinting at the steps. "Wait," he said slowly. "That's actually right." Calloway's jaw tightened. "Well," he muttered, reaching for the eraser. "Lucky guess." Zara's spine straightened. Her voice sharpened. "There's no luck in math, sir. It's either right or it's not." She nodded toward the board. "And that's right." A few gasps fluttered through the room. Someone chuckled under their breath. Calloway froze for a second, then scrubbed the board harder than necessary. But before he could say another word, before he could wave her away, a new voice cut through the room, measured, observant, calm. "I'd like to speak with Zara after class." All heads turned toward the back of the room, to the man no one had noticed until now. Dr. Nathan Ellis uncrossed his arms, standing slowly. Zara blinked. Everyone stared. But Ellis wasn't looking at them. He was looking at her. "That wasn't just right," Dr. Ellis said, stepping forward. "That was impressive." The class turned in unison. The air shifted again. But this time, the pressure wasn't on Zara. It was on Mr. Calloway. Calloway's face went pale. His mouth opened, then shut. Ellis took a few calm steps closer, his sharp eyes never leaving Zara. "Honestly," he continued, voice low but firm, "I'm more interested in what I just saw than whatever lesson you had planned." His eyes flicked to Calloway, just for a second, but the message was clear. Zara stayed still, though her fingers curled tightly around the edge of her sweater. Calloway cleared his throat, reaching for authority. "Well, you see, Zara's never really—" Ellis didn't let him finish. "Because you never asked," he said, tilting his head slightly. The words landed hard, not just in the room, but in Calloway's chest. His confidence faltered. Ellis turned fully to Zara now, his tone softening. Steady, sure, like he wasn't just offering her a challenge, but a door. "How would you like to take a real test?" Zara's breath hitched. The classroom fell silent, every student frozen. Calloway looked like he'd bitten into something sour. Zara forced herself to speak. For the first time since walking to the board, her voice wavered, not from fear, but the weight of something new. Possibility. "A test?" Ellis nodded. "One that matters." "I recruit for the National Math Scholars Program," Dr. Ellis said, his voice calm but commanding. "We find brilliant students who haven't been given a real chance." He nodded toward the now erased board. "That equation? That wasn't high school level. That was something I use in my first-year university class. And you solved it. Cleanly. In minutes." Zara's chest tightened. Years of being overlooked. Years of late-night study sessions no one noticed. Now, this stranger, this man in a sharp suit with quiet authority, was offering her something she'd never even dared to hope for. Calloway's voice cut through, brittle with frustration. "With all due respect, Dr. Ellis," he said, jaw tight, "she's not ready for something like this." Ellis didn't flinch. "She's exactly who we're looking for." Then, pointedly, "Whether you saw her talent doesn't matter." Calloway recoiled slightly, like he'd been slapped without anyone raising a hand. Zara sat frozen, her thoughts racing. Was this real? Was this actually happening? Ellis reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek black business card, the kind that looked too expensive to exist in her world, and placed it gently on her desk. "This is my contact info. You take a placement exam next week. If you pass, and I believe you will, you'll qualify for a full scholarship to one of the top universities in the country." The classroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, stunned disbelief. Zara stared at the card. Her fingers hovered over it, almost afraid to touch it. Then she picked it up. It didn't feel real, but it felt possible. Behind her, Calloway cleared his throat again, louder this time, desperate to regain control. But the class wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. Zara didn't think before she spoke. "No." The word came out before she could stop herself. Dr. Ellis raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'll do it," Zara said, her grip tightening around the card as if it might slip through her fingers. Ellis almost smiled. He appreciated the directness, the lack of hesitation. Calloway, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to disappear into the walls. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but no one moved. The usual chatter was replaced with the heavy silence of something new, something that hadn't been there before. For the first time in Zara's life, she wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. She held the card tightly in her hand, feeling the weight of it, the significance. "I know," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the lingering tension in the room. Calloway pressed his lips together. He looked like he was about to say something, to remind her that girls like her didn't belong in places like that, that people like him were meant to make sure she stayed where she was. But Ellis was quicker. He stepped in, shutting Calloway down with a single look. "She knows," Ellis said, his voice carrying the finality of a command. He turned to Zara, his eyes sharp and steady. "I'll send you the details. 1 week. Be ready." Zara nodded, slipping the card into her pocket. She half expected it to disappear if she looked at it too long, as if it were a dream she might wake up from at any moment. She didn't say another word. She just left. When she got home, the weight of what had just happened crashed over her. She placed the card on the kitchen table and stared at it. The words National Math Scholars Program seemed surreal. Her heart raced as she traced the edges of the card, the reality of what she had just agreed to sinking in. Could she really do this? Could she step into a world where she had never been allowed before? She'd read about the National Math Scholars Program once in an old library magazine tucked away in a dusty corner of the school. They didn't just offer opportunities, they built futures. MIT, Stanford, Princeton. The names had always felt like distant stars, too far to touch. But now, for the first time, those names felt within reach. The chance was hers, but as the initial excitement faded, it was quickly replaced by something heavier. She had 1 week, just 1 week to prove she belonged, to prepare for the hardest test of her life. The weight of it settled on her shoulders, a pressure that felt both daunting and exhilarating. Zara pulled out her notebook and dove in. The days blurred into one long stretch of exhaustion. Numbers swirled in her mind, and each equation felt like a step further into the unknown. Mornings were for school, where the equations felt too simple now, almost trivial compared to what lay ahead. The real work came after school, when she'd slip into Gus's diner, scribbling notes on napkins and receipts between orders, her mind always racing ahead to the next formula. Nights were consumed by books. The library became her second home, filled with pages that stretched her further than her teachers ever had. She pored over concepts far beyond her class, piecing together formulas, always chasing more. Her mother noticed. "Zara, you're not sleeping," she said one night, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. The concern in her voice was clear, but her expression was softer. She wasn't angry, just worried. "You're pushing too hard." Zara looked up, her eyes tired but determined. She forced a smile, her fingers tightening around the pencil in her hand. "Just one more problem, Mama," she said, her voice steady but laced with the weight of her own exhaustion. Her mother sighed, shaking her head slightly, but she didn't argue. She understood. This was Zara's fight now, and for once, it wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that she could stand where no one had ever expected her to. She left a plate of apples on the kitchen table, a quiet, almost unspoken way of saying, "I believe in you." No one had ever given Zara a real chance before. She wasn't about to waste this one. 3 months later, test day arrived too quickly. Zara stood outside Lincoln High's auditorium, gripping her worn backpack, her pulse racing with every beat. Word had spread like wildfire. The room was packed. Students, teachers, even the principal. Some were curious. Some doubted. Some, perhaps, even hoped she'd fail. At the front of the room, a whiteboard loomed, scrawled with an impossibly complex equation. Calloway stood to the side, arms crossed, his face a mask of neutrality. But Zara could see the smugness flicker behind his eyes. "This problem has stumped mathematicians for years," he announced, his voice cutting through the room. "Even graduate students struggle with it. But Zara believes she can solve it." His lips twisted into something between a smirk and a challenge. "Let's see if she can." The room fell into a heavy silence. Every eye locked on her. Zara stepped forward, the marker cold in her hand. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, but she steadied her breath, her body, her mind. Numbers weren't just numbers. They were pieces of a puzzle, and she'd spent her whole life solving puzzles, when no one was watching, when it seemed pointless, when it was just her and the math. She started writing, the marker scratching across the board with a quiet confidence. The crowd watched, their eyes heavy with anticipation. The first stroke of the marker was firm, deliberate. Zara tuned out the murmurs, the skeptical stares, and Calloway's looming presence. None of it mattered. Only the numbers mattered now. She broke the problem apart with precision, isolating variables, rearranging terms. Each step was sharp, clean, filled with the clarity that only focus could bring. She wasn't just solving it. She was understanding it. The patterns unfolded like a map guiding her to the answer. The logic clicked into place, each piece locking together as if the equation itself was yielding to her. Slowly, the whispers in the room faded. Students leaned forward, their skepticism turning into something else, something between awe and realization. Jason, the boy from the front row, squinted at the board, glancing between his notes and the calculations unfolding. A girl in the back nudged her friend, eyes wide in disbelief as she saw what was happening. Even the principal, who had been idly watching, sat up straighter, leaning in to follow every move. By the time Zara reached the halfway point, the room had gone completely still, the silence thick with anticipation. Mr. Calloway's smirk faltered, his composure cracking. His confidence began to waver, the reality of what was unfolding sinking in. He took a few cautious steps closer, arms still crossed, his eyes flicking between Zara and the board, desperately searching for any flaw, any mistake, that might give him the power to dismiss her. There was no reason to stop now, no excuse left for Calloway to regain control. But Zara didn't falter. She continued working, moving through the problem with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. Not this exact equation, perhaps, but the feeling, being doubted, being told she didn't belong. being pushed into the corner by people who refused to see her worth. That was familiar. She had lived with it, and she was done backing down. With one final, precise stroke, she underlined her answer. Then she turned. For a moment, the room was frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. Dr. Ellis stepped forward, his sharp gaze sweeping over the board. He scanned the numbers, the steps, the logic, and a slight smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, not from surprise, but from respect. "Absolutely correct," he said, his voice steady but powerful, slicing through the heavy silence. The room exploded in noise. Someone gasped. A low murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. "No way." Jason leapt from his seat. "That was insane," he exclaimed, his words a mix of awe and disbelief. Zara barely heard them. Her focus was entirely on Calloway. His mouth opened, then snapped shut, a rare silence overtaking him. There was nothing left to say. No sarcastic remark, no excuse to save face. His grip on his clipboard tightened, his knuckles turning white as if trying to hold on to something he could no longer control. Zara tilted her head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. There was no need for words. "Lucky guess," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The words landed with precision. Calloway inhaled sharply, his chest tightening, but before he could respond, Dr. Ellis turned to him. "I believe you mentioned that even graduate students struggle with this problem," Ellis said, his tone polite, but the underlying sharpness was unmistakable. Calloway's jaw clenched, his gaze darting back to the board, searching frantically for a mistake that wasn't there. But there was nothing. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. Ellis didn't wait for a response. His eyes returned to Zara. "We should talk after this," he said. "I have colleagues at MIT, Harvard, Stanford, people who would be very interested in meeting you." The room exploded. Zara's breath hitched. MIT, Harvard, Stanford. Those names were impossibly far away, belonging to a world that had always felt out of reach. A world where she didn't have to fight for every scrap of knowledge, where she wasn't being set up to fail. But today, she hadn't failed. She had triumphed. Calloway looked like he had been punched in the gut. His face went pale. The principal, now wide-eyed, was already murmuring to Dr. Ellis, trying to wrap his mind around how a student they had dismissed had just proven them all wrong. Zara, uncurling her fingers from the marker, her pulse still racing, she could barely grasp what had just happened. But one thing was clear. This was her moment. The world was about to open in ways she had never imagined. The reality of what had just happened sank in. She turned to face the students still staring at her, the ones who had laughed at her, whispered about her, dismissed her without a second thought. For years, she had been invisible, but not anymore. She picked up her backpack, set the marker down, and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps felt purposeful, echoing in the now silent room. Jason caught up to her, his grin wide, like he'd just witnessed some sort of magic trick. "Zara, that was insane. How did you—" She glanced at him, not breaking her stride. "I paid attention." With those simple words, she stepped out of the auditorium. The doors swung shut behind her, but somewhere, out there, a door to something greater had just swung wide open. The next few months were a whirlwind. 2 weeks after the exam, an official letter arrived from the National Math Scholars Program. Thick, embossed paper with her name printed in bold. Full scholarship. Accelerated program. Access to the best mentors in the country. For the first time, her future wasn't just a dream scribbled on diner receipts. It was real, tangible, and within reach. On her last day at Lincoln High, the hallways that had once felt suffocating now seemed too small, too confining for everything that was about to unfold. Calloway barely glanced at her as she walked past, his face unreadable. But Zara noticed the way his grip tightened on his clipboard. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was realization. It didn't matter. What mattered was the letter in her bag, the one that was taking her far beyond a school that had only noticed her once it was too late. 1 year later, Zara sat in MIT's sleek glass-walled study hall, staring at a new problem on her screen. Complex, beautiful, and challenging. Around her were some of the brightest minds in the world, students who had been groomed for this their entire lives, who had always expected to be here. But as her fingers danced across the keyboard, breaking the problem apart with ease, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't behind. She wasn't struggling. For the first time, she realized that she belonged. A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Still making the rest of us look slow, huh?" She looked up. Jason, the same boy who had once watched in awe as she solved that impossible equation, sat across from her, flipping through notes, grinning like he still couldn't believe they were both here. "I don't make you look slow," she said, smirking. "You do that yourself." Jason laughed. Same Zara. And maybe she was. But the girl who used to study in stolen moments, the one who was ignored and erased, was gone. In her place was someone who had fought for her seat at this table, someone who refused to stay in the shadows. As she turned back to her screen, eyes locking onto the equations waiting for her, Zara felt that familiar, quiet certainty. She could solve anything, and she wasn't going to stop now.